Hello, everybody. I hope you're all very well at the moment. Um, for today's English lesson, we're going to be looking at a poem called She Walks in Beauty, written by a very famous British poet, Lord Byron. For any of you out there who don't know me, I'm Mr. Tharby, one of the English teachers here at Durrington. Now, while we're watching this video, there's a few things I'd like you to be doing and thinking about. So I think it makes sense to watch this video once through before making any notes. Just listen to it, watch it, and get the general feeling for what the poem is about. Then the second thing to do is to watch it again, but this time pause as you're going through to make notes. Where possible, try to put the notes into your own words and also, of course, add in your own ideas too. If you're unsure about anything today, then do ask your teacher for advice online, either through Google Classroom through the stream, or you can also email your teacher on their school email address. So, Lord Byron, really notorious and famous British poet. He was known in the time he was living as somebody who was mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Now, he lived, as you'll notice, a very short life, 1788 to 1824, but it was certainly an action-packed life. He was an English romantic poet and known for being very flamboyant, and he liked to break the conventions. In other words, he liked to break the rules. Now, you may not be familiar with the term romantic poet. It doesn't mean that he wrote lots and lots of love poetry or that he fell in love all the time, although actually he did. But Romanticism was a general artistic movement. Poets and painters joined the movement, and there were three things that were really important. Romantic poets put a huge amount of emphasis on their personal emotions. They believed in their emotions, often over science. They believed in the power of imagination, and they liked to go into their own minds in their poetry. And also, lastly, the power of nature. They believe that often nature, the truths of the world lie in nature rather than in science. And so those three things we see in the poem when we come to read it later. Now, Byron had a very public private life. He was a celebrity in his time. And as well as being a poet, he was known for the many relationships that he had, both with women and even young men as well. So he would have been extremely controversial for the time that he was living in. His poetry is characterized by sensual and strongly emotional imagery. And we're going to see this in great detail when we come to read the poem in a couple of minutes. So, the poem itself was about the first time that Byron met or saw a lady called Mrs. Anne Beatrix Wilmot. Now, she was actually married to his cousin, but the first time that he saw her, she was in mourning. And in those times, if you're in mourning, you would have been expected to wear black, even when going to social events. And it's said that when he first saw her, she was in black, wearing spangles. So you can imagine her in a long black dress, kind of glittering in the night. And this experience moved him. He had an almost sort of religious experience seeing this woman. And in fact, he went, sat down, and the next day he wrote the poem in one go. So have a look at this image here. Have a quick look at it because it's based on Anne Beatrix Wilmot, and perhaps the woman that he saw looked just like this. So let's have a read of the poem before we look at it more closely. She walks in beauty. She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes, thus mellowed to that tender light which heaven to gaudy day denies. one shade the more, one ray the less, had half impaired the nameless grace which waves in every raven tress, or softly lightens over her face, where thoughts serenely sweet express how pure, how dear their dwelling place. And on that cheek, and o'er that brow, so soft, so calm, yet eloquent, the smiles that win, the tints that glow, but tell of days in goodness spent, a mind at peace with all below, a heart whose love is innocent. Okay. At this point, it would be worthwhile pausing the video and perhaps just reading it through once or twice on your own. Always remember that the first time you read a poem, you often find that you don't fully get it. Read it through a couple of times and then come back to have a look at the analysis. Okay. So let's start with the title. It's always a good idea to analyse a title if you can. And note the way that Byron says she walks in beauty. Okay, he doesn't say she is beautiful. She walks in it as if it's kind of some sort of aura, a mystical aura surrounding her, and she moves through it. It's really interesting that Byron writes she walks in the present tense as if it's happening now. The whole poem is sort of revealed in the present to us. She walks in beauty like the night. Now that's a really, really interesting simile, like the night, because it's quite unexpected. Traditionally, nighttime would have been associated with evil and darkness, but in this case, he's subverted this idea, and instead she seems to be quite mysterious, of cloudless climes, so of a clear sky, starry skies, and I think literally that might refer to the spangles on her dress, but also we've got this sort of heavenly imagery coming through here. And then in the next line, he takes this idea further, and on all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes. So everything that's good about darkness and light sort of weave together in her personal appearance and through her eyes, which are obviously sort of shining out of the poem. And this kind of gives us a bit of an insight into what Byron believes beauty and perfection are. They're about the perfect balance of opposites. And so we see here, as we see in the first two lines as well, the semantic field of light and darkness, and these ideas will continue all the way through to the end of the poem. And in the final two lines, some new ideas are introduced. And so look at the word mellowed. If something is mellow, it's peaceful and calm. And look at the word tender to describe the light. Very, very soft and tactile words. And then in the next line, again, this idea of heaven, which heaven to gaudy day denies. The word gaudy here, if something's gaudy, it is bright and garish. It's quite cheap looking, really. But here we see her elegance. She's being shown in juxtaposition with the gaudiness of the day. Actually, it's the softness, the balance between dark and light that makes her beautiful. And so on to the second stanza then. And he takes these ideas and explores them even further. One shade the more, one ray the less, had half impaired the nameless grace. In other words, if she was a little bit darker, a little bit more shady, or a little bit lighter, so there were more rays of sun on her, she wouldn't look as good as she does now. It would impair her. It would ruin her beauty. And he describes her beauty as being nameless and a kind of grace. And I think there's a couple of things to say about that. First of all, it's nameless. He's finding it almost impossible, even though he's Byron, the most famous poet of his day. He's finding it's almost impossible to describe her beauty. And then a subtle hint about her heavenliness, her being like an angel through the word grace, which is often a religious term which is associated with God. Continuing again, and I love this next line, which waves in every raven tress. So this grace of her waves, it flows through the tresses of her hair. So that's a description of her hair. But note that adjective raven. So if something is raven, it's black in colour, dark black. And again, Byron is taking something that we might traditionally associate with negative connotations. Think of the bird, the raven. And we see a raven in Macbeth, if you remember. It signifies death. But here he subverts this association and actually uses it to show her ravishing beauty. And then it's a beauty that lightens over her face. It seems to brighten her face. And the poem seems to start to zoom in on her face. And as we move through the next two lines, into her mind. So, in her mind, thoughts serenely sweet. Again, very peaceful, sweet. So obviously these are really good thoughts. She's pure. She's religiously innocent. How dear their dwelling place. So a dwelling is somewhere you live. So he's suggesting the idea that this purity, this sweetness, this serenity lives within her mind. So we've got this imagery of peace and innocence. And it's at this point in the poem, and this is a key idea, make sure you write this one down, that the poem switches from her external beauty, so what she looks like on the outside, to her internal beauty, which I think is the key idea in this poem. We've almost got a volta here, and a volta is the point in a poem where things change, things shift. And here we're shifting from the outside to the inside, from the external to the internal. So let's have a look at the last stanza then. And on that cheek and over that brow, so the face and the brow, so soft, so calm, yet eloquent. So again, that imagery of gentleness, tactile. And look at the repetition of the so. He can barely express how much of an impact it's having on him. But also the word eloquent here. Now, eloquent may not be a word that you know, but it's usually used to describe how somebody speaks. So if you speak in a really sort of fluent or persuasive way, you're really good with words verbally. You describe somebody as eloquent. But here, he's turned that idea on his head. Her beauty seems to move you. It persuades you. It has a power almost equivalent to the power of words. Now let's look at the next two lines. The smiles that win, the tints that glow. So she's got a kind of glowing, slightly pink, slightly red face. And the smiles, that sort of sense of joy and happiness. But this is the crucial bit. But tell of days in goodness spent. So what he's doing here is looking at her, and remember, he's never actually spoken to her. He's just watching her from afar and kind of falling in love. He thinks that because she's physically beautiful on the outside, that actually he can tell that she's morally good, that she is a good person, that her outer body tells you what she's like on the inside. Okay, like the cover of a book. Telling you what the person's like on the inside. And then, last of all, the final two lines. A mind at peace with all below. At peace, again, that imagery of peace, the semantic field of peace that we've seen all the way through. But look at that, with all below, as if she's above, as if she's superior. And I think it's kind of this heavenly imagery, as if he's put her on this sort of pedestal and he sees her from above, almost like she's floating above him. And look at the end again. A heart whose love is innocent, again, pure. And again, he is describing her internal beauty. Apologies. So there's the poem moving from the external to the internal, and using all this lovely imagery of calmness and softness and peace, but also the balance of light and dark that we see in her. And so, just as we move towards the end of this presentation, I just wanted to talk about the structure a bit and make 3 points about it. So, what you will notice if you look closely at each of the stanzas, you'll notice that each of them ends with a full stop. Okay, or I suppose it's an exclamation mark at the end there. Yeah, if we look at the first one, have a look at this. Actually, there's no full stops here. So what we have is enjambment, and enjambment's that idea whereby the line just flows on to the next one as it goes through. In fact, what we see is that every verse is a sentence on its own. And what you get here is a flowing down through the lines of the poem, and it creates a pace to the poem, and a sort of a tone of appreciation as it moves through, and it's almost breathless. It's hard to pause when you read it, and it goes all the way to the end, to that final exclamation mark, it ending on a real high, almost like he's almost lost for words. Let's just stop that there. Now, let's have a look at the rhyme scheme, and you may have noticed that the first line and the third line and the fifth line rhyme: night, bright, light, and then second, fourth, and sixth: skies, eyes, denies, and we call this a A-B, A-B, A-B rhyming scheme. And we it's a perfect rhyming scheme. And when a poem rhymes, it tends to suggest that things are good in the world, things are perfect, things are certain. And I think this works perfectly for this poem, because Anne Beatrix Wilmot is to Byron perfect, and he's absolutely certain of that. So the rhyme scheme supports the general idea of the poem, and also the poem's rhythm is iambic tetrameter. Okay, so basically, iambic tetrameter is when you have 8 syllables per line. Some of you might know iambic pentameter, when you have 10 per line. And what you get is what's called 4 metric feet. So ti-tum, 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 ti-tum. Or she walks in beauty like the night. Ti-tum, 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 ti-tum. And it's very rhythmic, and if you read all the way through, the poem follows that rhythm all the way through. Again, it's perfect. It helps to increase the pace and the sense of movement of the poem, and like everything in the poem, and like the woman he's describing, it screams elegance. And so, to finish off the presentation, I just wanted to summarize the main ideas from this poem. So firstly, the poem is about this idea of admiration and having a longing for someone from a distance. Secondly, it's from the romantic perspective of love. Love is something that comes from within, and we've got this idea of love at first sight, and love can be sort of immediately something that grasps you and overwhelms you with its power. Third, we have an idealized version of female beauty. This is Byron looking at somebody and imagining how brilliant this is. Actually, Anne Beatrix Wilmot could have been a horrible person. Okay, she could have smoked 100 cigarettes a day. I don't know, but in this poem, he sees her as this almost angelic being that's been brought down from heaven. This is not a realistic poem like Valentine that you've read in class, or indeed Cozy Apologia. This is much closer to Sonnet 43 and Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who kind of knits together these ideas of religion and beauty as well as Byron. Number 4, the idea that perfection can be found in balance. Okay, really important idea. And number 5, and lastly, to say it again, the connection between the internal and the external. So what we see on the outside and what's really there on the inside. So I really hope you've enjoyed this presentation. As I say, it's a good idea to look through it again, pause it, and to take notes. And once again, your teachers are there to help you. We're here to help you. So please do message us and let us know what you think, and let us know any issues you're having with the work that we've set. Thank you, and goodbye, and have a lovely day.